Hi, I'm Lauren. Welcome to my craft room. Thanks for joining me today. And I'm going to be sharing with you how I created these Mother's Day cards with very quick stenciled backgrounds. I'm starting off with the layered sunflower stencils, and I'm going to be starting with the B stencil. So there's A and B, which have different flower petals, and I'm starting with B and using a foam blender to blend on some mustard seed distress oxide. So that's going to be my first layer. Then I put on the third layer, which are the flower centers, and I used Vintage Photo. And finally, the fourth layer, which are the leaves, and I used Mowed Lawn. So from those three layers, I have the start of my flowers on my stenciled background using just ink and my little foam blenders to add that ink through the stencil. The final layer, I'm bringing back that A stencil again, and this time I'm going to do some stencil paste. Now the petals will overlap the centers of my flowers just a tiny bit, but it's not really noticeable, and I think it just adds more fun to the flowers. And I'm grabbing some yellow stencil paste. This particular stencil paste is called Shooting Star, and it's from Ranger, partnered with Simon Hurley, and it's a lunar paste, and it's very buttery and goes right through the stencil with my palette very easily. I love a good stencil reveal, so here you can see how those beautiful sunflowers turned out with layering the ink and then that final layer of some stencil paste through the stencil, and I just think it looks so beautiful, and I'm going to set it aside to dry. I'm going to do a second background now, and this time I'm using the layered butterflies, and there are three for this one. So I'm starting with the first layer, and I'm going to be filling in these butterflies with Distress Oxide again. I'm starting with spun sugar, and I'm filling in all of those butterflies, completely covering them with this pale pink color. I'm going to bring in picked raspberry next, and I'm just doing a very light kind of dusting of this color towards the center of all my butterflies. You can see I'm not ink blending, I'm just going through and dabbing on that color. And then I'm bringing spun sugar back and I'm blending them together so that way it gives my butterflies kind of a two-tone look. And finally, using a brush, I'm adding wilted violet to be the butterfly centers and their little antenna. And then for the final layer, which is actually the second layer in this stencil set, I'm using some more stencil paste. And this particular one is Pearl White Stardust Butter by the Crafters Workshop. And it just adds a nice shimmery shine to the image. So again, another fun stencil reveal. And here you can see those beautiful butterflies and that shimmery detail through that particular stencil. So I'm going to set that aside to dry as well. I've done some hot foiling with the Mom and Mother hot foil plates. I've also die cut a butterfly out of some pink cardstock, and this is the butterfly shaker die, but I'm just going to use it as some detail on my butterfly Mother's Day card. I'm adding a little bit of that picked raspberry towards the center of the butterfly, and then adding wilted violet to color in the body and antenna of my butterfly, so that way it looks a lot like the butterflies on my stenciled background. Once I have plenty of ink, I'm going to set that aside to dry as well. Next, I'm going to work on my sentiment. So I love the sentiment, "Thanks for all you do," from the Mom stamp set. So I'm going to emboss it onto some purple cardstock, which I will trim down to be a strip just around my embossed sentiment. And since I'm using a dark cardstock, I'm going to emboss with clear embossing powder and clear embossing ink and white embossing powder. And then for my green, that's actually a label that I die cut from the Easter sentiment coordinating dies. So there's just a really pretty label with a stitch detail in the coordinating die set for the stamps. And I'm going to emboss with that same clear embossing ink, and I'm going to do some gold embossing powder. So that way there is some contrast and you can read the shimmery sentiment on the green and then the white on the dark purple. So I'm going to go ahead and use my heat gun to melt that embossing powder down. And once they've cooled down a bit, I'm going to grab just a Swiffer cloth that I keep with my embossing tools to help pick up some of that anti-static powder that I put on my paper before I did my stamping. So now I have this little tiny trimmer, and I'm just going to trim around the sentiment on that purple cardstock because I want it to look just like a small little strip to layer underneath my hot foiled Mom sentiment. Next, I have a few stamped images. I have some flowers that are from the Potted Sunflowers stamp set, and I have a couple different sizes of butterflies that are also from the Mom stamp set, which is where I got my sentiment from. And I'm just going to quickly go through my coloring. I didn't do anything, very crazy here. I just have at least two colors for the smaller images. I'm using greens for my leaves and yellow for my petals, and I'm going to do a brown center of my flowers. And I'm using my stenciled background as a guide to pick out my Oh Hoo Hoo art markers, which are an alcohol art marker. And again, just using the colors that are on my background to help with me choosing the colors for my image because I want them to match. After I finish my flowers, I'm going to go over to my butterflies and I'm going to do a purple body for my butterflies, and then I'll use two shades of pink to again try to look kind of like the pink of my butterflies on my stenciled background because I have that brighter pink in the middle and then a lighter pink around the edges of the wings. I'm trying to replicate that same look with my alcohol markers. Once I'm all done coloring them in, I do like to grab a white jelly roll just to add a little bit of highlights, and then I also like to color white on top of anywhere that I accidentally colored out of the lines because sometimes these images are super small and I don't get it quite perfect. So using that white gel pen just helps color over those little tiny mistakes of coloring out of the line. I just kind of followed the wings to create some highlights and then added some little spots where the stamp had details, and then again just a little bit of lines here and there around the petals where I think light would be hitting my images. I am coloring on a very low tack mat so that way I can just peel off my images, and while they're on the mat and I'm coloring, they're not moving around. So now that everything is pretty much ready to go to start assembling my cards and my backgrounds are dry, I'm going to trim them down to 4 by 5 1/4. So that way they're slightly smaller than an A2 size card. The original paper that I was doing all my ink blending and stenciling with was actually 5 1/2 by 6. I trimmed them down from one piece of paper that I use for ink blending. So I'm getting my card bases ready. This sunflower one is going to be I guess a side folding card, but I have it in horizontal, so it's more of a landscape style card. And just using a tape runner, I glued my background to the card base, leaving a small white border around my background. I added some foam adhesive to my green label, and I'm going to center it on my card but also raise it up just a little bit. I want it to be a little higher on my background and rather than it being too centered. Then I'm going to grab my wet glue that just has a fine point tip on it, and I'm going to add glue behind my flowers where it will overlap onto the green label, and I'm going to put that just below the "Thanks for all you do" embossed sentiment. And then I'm going to repeat that process with my Mother hot foiled sentiment, this time adding glue towards the bottom of that cardstock and gluing it above the "Thanks for all you do" sentiment. And that will finish off this beautiful sunflower floral card for Mother's Day. The second card is going to be a top folding card in portrait. I prefer top folding cards only because I think they sit on my mantle or other people's bookshelves, etc. a little better, but that's just my preference. Of course, do whatever you like best. And just like I did with the sunflower card, I trimmed this down to 4 by 5 1/4. So there's a little bit of a white border around my stenciled background, and I use that tape runner to adhere that to the card base. I have these 1/8 foam adhesive strips, and I'm just going to very carefully go around my butterfly's wings and completely cover the backside of my butterfly so there's a little bit of elevation, just like I did with my green label on the floral card. And I'm gluing this to the center and towards the top of my card base. And then I'm going to start with adding my Mom sentiment. I'm putting foam adhesive where it will overlap through the butterfly wings onto the the stenciled background, and then using wet glue where it will overlap with my die cut butterfly. Next, I'm going to add my sentiment strip with the thanks for all you do, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Add a little bit of foam adhesive where it will touch the stenciled background through the butterfly die cut, and then some wet glue where it will overlap that butterfly since there already is that elevation there. And then finally, I will add in my butterflies. I'm going to do 2 of them with just glue and 1 with some foam adhesive just because of how I place it on the card. I like to do things in sets of 3, so I had the 1 large butterfly and 2 small ones, and I'm just going to put them where I think they would look nice around the butterfly on the card. And with that, that will finish off these 2 Mother's Day cards. I hope you're enjoying all of the stenciled ideas this week on Pretty Pink Posh's social media. I think stenciling makes such wonderful cards, and you can make a bunch at a time, which is really great. If you need any help with your stencils because of stencil paste getting stuck to the stencils, which I don't like, I recommend getting a container that is a little bit larger than 6 by 6 and filling it with soapy, like just regular dishwashing soap and water, and just keep it, in your craft room or in the bathroom or in the kitchen, just close by. And when you're done stenciling, just put it right into that container of soapy water, and it will help make sure you can get off your ink and your stencil paste without any damage or excess ink and stencil paste on your stencils. But I hope this video was fun and that you try making your own Mother's Day cards with the beautiful stencils from Pretty Pink Posh. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!